Happy New Year. Great to see you again in 2015. I'm Carl Azus with CNN Student News, commercial-free current events for middle and high school classrooms. First up this January 5th, remembering two New York City policemen. Thousands gathered yesterday for the funeral of Officer Wenjian Liu. Thousands attended the previous weekend's funeral of Officer Rafael Ramos. The two men were ambushed and shot to death on December 20th while parked in their patrol car. The suspect, who killed himself afterward, ranted on social media about his hatred for police. Since the shooting, the policemen have been hailed as heroes. Officer Liu's wife said he was proud of his job. Officer Ramos saw his job as a ministry and was working toward becoming a lay chaplain. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio called them the very best of New Yorkers. But many police turned their backs on the mayor as he spoke. During protests of recent police killings in Ferguson, Missouri and New York, Mayor de Blasio was criticized for appearing to support the protesters and not the police. Leaders encouraged them to lay their anger aside out of respect for the slain officers. A few days after Christmas, America's formal combat mission in Afghanistan came to an end. What does that mean? Well, around 10,000 U.S. troops will stay there for the time being, and they may have to fight. But the mission in what has become America's longest war is far different than when it began in October of 2001.
This is ISAF headquarters in Kabul, Afghanistan, the home of the International Security Assistance Force. And in 2015, it's undergoing a massive change in both size and mission. After 13 years of a combat mission here following the attacks of 9/11, it is now transitioning to a train, advise, and assist mission, helping Afghan security forces secure the country. But the size also changing from a peak of 140,000 international forces here, most of those American, down to about 13,000. Of those 13,000, almost 11,000 are going to be American. Although the mission is now defined as train and advise and assist, there will be some combat role for U.S. forces here for force protection, self-defense, they say. If those forces are under threat, U.S. forces will have the right, the ability to go out in the field and attack that threat, attack Taliban forces behind it. U.S. forces will also continue to carry out operations against the remnants of al-Qaeda and carry out close air support in support of Afghan operations on the ground. Now, you speak to commanders here, and they say there are differences between Iraq and Afghanistan, so that the withdrawal will not lead to the same situation we saw in Iraq, a collapse of the local security forces and there the advance of ISIS. What are those differences? They say, one, that the population here in Afghanistan has much greater support for international security forces. They also say that the Afghan security forces are much more advanced, already leading, they say, 99% of missions here. So what happens if U.S. forces believe that Afghan forces cannot continue to secure the country? Will they have the latitude, the flexibility, perhaps to extend the mission or change the mission over time? That remains an open question. But already, after more than 13 years here, the U.S. mission, the international mission in Afghanistan, much longer than anyone expected, and it is changing dramatically.
All right, first roll call of the year. We picked these schools from our transcript page at cnnstudentnews.com. First one today is from Cheonan, South Korea. Cheonan Osung Middle School is on today's roll. Call it the Wolverine State, call it the Great Lakes State, call it pure Michigan. The Indians are online at Hartford High School in Hartford. And in the first state, Delaware, we're aware of the Conrad Schools of Science. Hello to the Redskins in Wilmington. If you've already made a roll call request, or if you're planning to, you're going to notice our site looks different. It's part of a massive redesign at CNN.com. Everything we provide is still here. The show is front and center. Teachers, for the transcript page and program archives, just scroll down. Under our extra credit resources, you'll see a link to the new CNN Digital. It tells you about the changes at CNN.com and takes you on a tour of the new site. And under feedback, you can send us an email telling us what you think. The Centers for Disease Control is calling this year's influenza virus an epidemic. It's everywhere, and we're only midway through the flu season. It goes through May, so things could get worse before they get better. One reason, this year's flu vaccine. Researchers say it's not as effective because the flu strains that are spreading are not covered by it. But scientists are getting better at predicting where the flu will hit.
It's amazing how much more we know about how to predict the flu. What they're trying to do now is predict the flu very much in the way that you predict the weather.
Hurricane season. NOAA is predicting a below average season.
Many parts of the state were under a hurricane warning early Thursday.
I know, all kidding aside, we don't always get the weather right, but this is pretty interesting. They use mathematical modeling to sort of predict where flu virus is going to be most dominant, but then they look at real-time data, and the real-time data is fascinating. People searching for flu on Google, for example, and they assimilate all that information to give you what are called hotspots, but they can go even deeper than that. This is a particular project that comes out of the Columbia School that you can actually figure out which week is going to be the worst in your particular city. New York City, January 10th, that's going to be your week. But also for hospitals, they could be anticipating more patients coming in, so leaving more surge capacity, more beds available, having more medications, flu vaccine, things like that on standby. But this is sort of where we're headed with regard to predicting when things are going to get really bad.
It was in 1949 that 1984 was published. George Orwell's classic novel that many of you are required to read envisioned a world of misery 35 years into the future. Well, a series of movies that came out in the 1980s envisioned this year. What kind of technology did filmmakers then think we'd have now? And were their predictions anywhere close? Jake Tapper takes us back to the future for a look at today.
We're finally here. We're at the future. The year 2015.
2015? You mean we're in the future?
And it is exactly as Back to the Future from 1985.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
And its sequel, Back to the Future Part 2, Foretold. Yes, that stretch included a future with hoverboards and flying cars.
I need to borrow your hoverboard.
Now, hoverboards aren't exactly ubiquitous yet. This Funny or Die spoof from last year sure looked convincing. It even featured Doc Brown and legendary skateboarder Tony Hawk. But just a few weeks ago, this video popped of Hawk riding a prototype of an actual hoverboard from Hendo Hoverboards. Now, how about those flying cars?
Hey, right on time.
Cars these days are still a ground-based technology, but there is something of a tech race going on to create the first flying car. The Massachusetts firm Terrafugia has been working on a model, as well as iTech, which sells a flying dune buggy today. We're still waiting on those self-lacing shoes from Nike. In 2009, the shoe giant filed a patent for that technology, but no sign of them hitting stores just yet, nor self-adjusting jackets.
I'm adjusting fit.
So the film was a little optimistic, and in some cases, completely off.
System works swiftly in the future now that they've abolished all lawyers.
3D movies are big at the box office, even if we never got to Jaws 19 or a hologram attacking movie poster. But on the small screen, nailed it.
Okay, I want channels 18, 24, 63.
And those teleconferences on flat-screen TVs looked like pure sci-fi fiction in 1989, but today flat-screen TVs are everywhere, and you can video conference on your cell phone even. Though phones were one area where the movie really whiffed. Payphones dot the set, but they're almost nowhere to be found today. And fax machines, though they're still around, barely, played a huge role in that movie's fake future. When it comes to the McFlys at dinner, we're still waiting on those instant pizzas and ceiling-mounted gardens. But we did get kids preoccupied by their own digital worlds. Of course, instead of iPhones and iPads, the film used glasses-based devices. Of course, you can pick up a call today on your Google Glass.
Hello? Hello, anybody home?
Jake Tapper, CNN, Washington.
Well, our time for the day is past, 10 minutes in the future from when we started last. Thank you for the present of letting us present a look at the present. We predict we'll be back for a future show tomorrow. Time will tell if you'll join us then. We hope you will. I'm Carl Azus for CNN Student News.